Class, here's a slightly more complex procedure in this program. We're going to write a program that will find the larger of two numbers that are tossed to it as input. Let's get started. We'll add a procedure. And why don't we call this procedure find underscore larger. Now, if you're going to find the larger of two numbers, your two input parameters would be the two numbers to be tested. So why don't we call that first one number 1, and that would be an input parameter, so that's fine. Second one is number 2, which is also an input parameter. And the result in this case would be the larger. So why don't we call it that, larger? And that's not an input, that's going to be the output that's going to be returned by this particular procedure. Okay, so it's called find larger, two inputs, number 1 and number 2, and then we're going to output the larger. Let's see what that looks like. Alright, there it is for the start. You can see that we've got the inputs number 1 and number 2, and output parameter is going to be the larger. Now let's do the job. Now how would you do that? How would you determine the larger of two numbers? Wouldn't you say, well, if number 1 is more than number 2, then number 1 is the larger, otherwise number 2 is the larger? Well, that's what we're going to do in this particular procedure. So what we need is a selection. We need to make a decision here. And our condition is going to be if number 1 is more than number 2. Now we could do it as less than 2, it just depends how you want to look at it. Now if number 1 is more than number 2, then we need an assignment over here that would say that the larger is number 1. Number 1 must be the larger. And if that's not true, then the larger would be number 2. Just to speed things up, I'm going to try to copy this and paste it over here. And we'll modify this one, of course, to change it to number 2. Okay, that's all we need. This procedure doesn't need any other symbols. If number 1 is greater than number 2, then number 1 is the larger. Otherwise, number 2 is the larger. That's all we need. Let's go back to main, and we need to call that particular procedure. And of course, we call it by its name, which is find underscore larger. And as you can see down below, we need two inputs and an output. So our two inputs, once again, I'm going to use literal values here, actual numbers. Normally these would be variables, but just to make this simple, we're going to use some actual literal numeric values. How about 10 and 4? And we do have to mention the output parameter larger. Raptor is somewhat unusual in that respect. Most programming languages don't require you to indicate what the returned value of a procedure is, but that's Raptor. Okay, there's the call. Now, we need to use that in some way, so let's produce an output here that's going to take advantage of that returned value, that output parameter. So in our output, let's say the larger number is plus larger. And that's all we need. Okay, let's give it a try. We'll give it a run. Step by step is the best way to understand this. Now, as soon as we do this, we're going to go into the sub-procedure. There we go. And you can see that 10 and 4 have been passed in as our two values. Now we'll make the decision. 10 is bigger, so we're in the right branch. Now we're back in main, and we're out, and you'll notice that 10 is the value of the larger. And there's our output. Hope that helps.